We're ready? Okay. Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for being here. I am Mark Levine, Manhattan Borough President, and I'm joined today by Menachem Rosensaft, who is one of the world's leaders on law and genocide. He himself has an inspiring life story, having been born in one of the displaced person camps in Europe after the war, Bergen-Belsen, and the son of two Holocaust survivors, one of whom had been at Auschwitz. I'm also pleased to be joined by Gideon Taylor, who is the Executive Director of the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York City, and by Alison Clemente, who is a former Lauder Fellow at the World Jewish Congress and currently a senior at the University of Pennsylvania. And I want to acknowledge the World Jewish Congress having led on this issue for years. We are here this morning on January 27th, the date that the international community marks as Holocaust Remembrance Day. This date is significant because it was on this day in 1945 that the Soviet Army liberated the death camp of Auschwitz. So I think that New Yorkers would be stunned to know that commemorated in a place of honor here in the Canyon of Heroes are two men who led France in the Nazi era, a country that sent 75,000 French Jews who were deported, most to their death, many who were murdered in Auschwitz. How can this be? We're talking about two men, Pierre Laval, Philippe Pétain, who played prominent roles in France during World War I and were honored here in 1930 and 1931 with a ticker tape parade. It's really the greatest civic honor that our city can offer an individual or a group in a place which is as close to sacred ground as we have as a civic society here in New York. Now, in 1930 and 31, humanity did not envision what would unfold in the years that followed, and certainly did not expect that these two men would go on to become some of the greatest villains of the World War II era. Philippe Pétain was the head of state of the French Vichy regime, the Nazi-collaborators regime, a man who personally authorized laws designating Jews as second class, as stripping them of their citizenship, of denying them the right to hold public office, that Pierre Laval would be the prime minister in that government, a man who oversaw and encouraged the deportation of French Jews. I will read you a quote from him. In 1942, he said, "No man and nothing can sway me from my determination to rid France of alien Jews and send them back where they came from." That was Laval speaking in 1942. These two men are honored here on our Canyon of Heroes, alongside giants of history like Nelson Mandela, alongside heroes like our COVID-19 health responders. This is jarring. It is inexplicable. It is unacceptable that in a city home to 1 million Jews, thousands of whom are themselves Holocaust survivors. This is the largest community of Holocaust survivors on earth outside of Israel. It is unacceptable that these two men would occupy a place of honor here. So we are making a clear call today on International Holocaust Remembrance Day that these names be removed from the Canyon of Heroes. That is our demand today. And I want to credit one man in particular, Professor Menachem Rosensaft, for leading this fight, at times single-handedly, for years. For years. We are here because of you, Menachem. And so I would like to ask you to step to the podium and say a few words, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Borough President Levine, for your very kind words. Good morning. I stand here today as the Associate Executive Vice President and General Counsel of the World Jewish Congress. More importantly, as Borough President Levine mentioned, I stand here today on International Holocaust Remembrance Day as the son of two survivors of the Nazi death and concentration camps of Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen. First, I want to thank Borough President Levine for taking on this critically important task to rid our streets of two markers, two plaques, one here before us, one across the street, that honor convicted war criminals who played, as Mark mentioned, an active role in the perpetration of the Holocaust. Ladies and gentlemen, there's something incredibly offensive about a report by supposed experts on culture who believe that, and I quote, if a marker on the streets of New York City honoring someone who sent tens of thousands of Jews to their death at Auschwitz, and here I want to quote exactly, is accurate and not celebratory of egregious values or action, it should not be removed, end quote. This is a profane rationale given by Mayor de Blasio's Advisory Commission on City Art, Monuments, and Markers in 2018 in support of their recommendation that the two plaques we are talking about today featuring Pétain, that the plaque featuring Pétain should remain alongside the plaques honoring Winston Churchill, de Gaulle, and Mandela, and a host of other genuine heroes. It seems that the Commission never even bothered to look at the plaque that we're standing at here for Pierre Laval. It does not seem to have occurred to the members of the Commission that the plaques bearing Pétain and Laval's name are in and of themselves celebratory of these two men, of who they were and what they represented. And the fact is, as Borough President Levine pointed out, they were among the most craven, the most notorious, the most reprehensible of Adolf Hitler's allies during World War II. Let us remember, as a succession of French presidents, beginning with Jacques Chirac in 1995, have admitted, that Jews in France were rounded up, arrested, put into first detention camps, and then into cattle cars bound for Auschwitz by French police officers at the behest of a Nazi collaborationist puppet state and government headed by Pétain and Laval. These are two men with Jewish blood on their hands. It would appear that this fact was of no importance to the members of the Advisory Commission on City Art, Monuments, and Markers, and Mayor de Blasio did not deem fit to overrule them and keep his promise that, as he tweeted in 2017, quote, the commemoration for Nazi collaborator Philippe Pétain in the Canyon of Heroes will be one of the first we remove. He didn't. Ladies and gentlemen, statues of and monuments to leaders of the Confederacy who fought to perpetuate the evils of slavery have been and continue to be taken down because they represent the absolute worst aspect of the human condition. That is as it should be. And let's be very clear about one fundamental fact. Pétain and Laval are no better. The World Jewish Congress first asked New York City authorities to remove these plaques almost 6 years ago. And I want to credit here my colleague Betty Arenberg, the executive director of the World Jewish Congress North America, for her initiative in contacting the members of city government at the time. And I am deeply grateful to Borough President Levine, to my good friend Gideon Taylor, the CEO of New York's Jewish Community Relations Council, for joining us in this campaign to rid our street, our environment, of an absolute desecration of Holocaust memory. Pétain and Laval, a high school student or college student walking on these streets, might say to themselves upon hearing their names in a European history class, wait a second, I just saw them feature on plaques on Broadway. They can't be that bad if they have plaques honoring them in New York City. Enough is enough. Laval and Pétain were evil incarnate, alongside Hitler, Himmler, Eichmann, and all the other architects and perpetrators of the genocide of European Jewry during the Holocaust. And today we call on Mayor Adams and the New York City Council to take all necessary steps to remove the blight represented by these two obscene markers once and for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Rosensaft, again, for leading the fight on this for years. We're inspired by your life story and your determination. We're grateful to the World Jewish Congress. I want to emphasize that this is a settled matter in France. France has litigated this. Laval and Pétain were tried for treason and convicted. And in subsequent years, beginning shortly after the war, their names were stripped from streets and monuments and more. There is no debate on this in France. It's a consensus matter. It should be here in New York City as well. I next want to call up a friend, an important leader in New York City, the head of the JCRC, Gideon Taylor.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Firstly, I want to thank the Borough President Levine for taking leadership, for stepping forward, for seeing this issue for what it really is. And I want to thank and acknowledge my closest friend, Menachem Rosensaft. He tells not just this story, but the story of what happened to Holocaust survivors, to those who perished. Through his family story, he is an inspiring figure for countless Jews, non-Jews, students, people of New York and the wider world. And I thank you, Menachem, for being there to make sure those stories are told. Friends, we are not standing here in a vacuum. Yes, today is Holocaust Remembrance Day, but we're not just standing at this plaque at a neutral time of history. There are two trends at the moment that we need to think about. Firstly, we are seeing a dramatic increase in anti-Semitic activity in this city. We have seen the doubling of anti-Semitic acts in the last 2 years in New York City, the home of the largest Jewish community outside of Israel. And the second trend that we're seeing is increasingly a young population of New Yorkers that know less and less about the Holocaust, for whom the Holocaust is a distant memory. A recent survey showed that of millennials, over half could not name one single concentration camp, could not name Auschwitz as a place that for so many of us, so many in the world, is the ultimate symbol of horror. Friends, the Holocaust did not start with death camps and concentration camps. It started with hate. It started with measures and individual steps. It started with individuals. And we have to remember that. And that's why history matters. That's why these plaques are important. Removing these plaques, taking them from this place of tremendous honor, is not removing history or hiding history. It is telling history. And that is what we have an opportunity to do now. And that is why we call on the administration to take this step. Because to do so, to remove these plaques, would be the ultimate teaching moment. A moment in time when we see a rise in anti-Semitism. A moment in time when we see the memory of the Holocaust and the memory of hate and what hate can do disappearing slowly from the memories and the understandings of our younger generation. This is an opportunity to teach, to tell the story, to make history what it needs to be, the way in which we set a direction for our society going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gideon. You know, against that trend that Gideon so powerfully described of young people who are losing memory of the Holocaust, who know so little about the events of World War II and the horrible destruction of the Jewish communities, it is really heartening to see that there are young leaders, young New Yorkers, who are stepping up to carry the torch forward, to commemorate the Holocaust, so that we never unlearn the painful and important lessons of that era. And one of those young leaders is Allison Comite, a Manhattanite, now a senior at the University of Pennsylvania, who recently completed a Lauder Fellowship at the World Jewish Congress, who I'm really grateful is here to say a few words for us on this topic. Please, Allison.
Thank you. As the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors, a Jewish student in college, a former Lauder Fellow at the World Jewish Congress, and a proud New Yorker, I am extremely dismayed by the very idea that these convicted war criminals continue to be honored in New York City. Plaques honoring Philippe Pétain and Pierre Laval have been on prominent display here for far too long. As leaders of the Hitler-allied Vichy regime, these two men watched as approximately 77,000 Jews were murdered. Their government publicized anti-Semitic laws, rounded up Jews for deportation to death camps, and also seized Jewish property. They should not be honored for this atrocious work. The World Jewish Congress is therefore demanding that these plaques be removed from Broadway's Canyon of Heroes. Symbols of honor matter a lot. Unfortunately, both Pétain and Laval epitomize collaboration and participation in horrific Nazi crimes against humanity. Even in France, no one wants anything to do with them. So why should they be placed in positions of prominence in Lower Manhattan? Former Mayor Bill de Blasio even briefly agreed to remove these plaques in 2017, but did not deliver on his promise. As the granddaughter of two Holocaust survivors, I urge Mayor Eric Adams to have these markers removed immediately.
Thank you, Allison. I want to clarify that matters of public monuments and cultural markers in the city are under the jurisdiction of an entity called the Public Design Commission. They have jurisdiction on this matter. This is the agency to whom we have directed our letter demanding the removal of these two men's names. And you will probably hear in the days ahead discussion of slippery slopes and gray areas and tough calls when it comes to removal of historic markers. And we do acknowledge that there are lots of complicated questions that have to be worked out on the topic of removal of historic markers. But we also firmly believe that Nazi collaborators are not in a gray area. That wherever you draw the line, Laval and Pétain are on the wrong side of that line. That there really is no debate about these two men here in the Canyon of Heroes, sacred ground for New York City. And it's why we are demanding that their names be removed today on International Holocaust Remembrance Day. So I think we're going to open it up for questions. Yeah.
Who ultimately holds the key to making this happen? This has been since the Nazi administration. You've laid out all of the facts. What are exactly the gray areas, and who is the ultimate person who can get these removed? Because this could be a first. No names have been removed.
Yes. First, I want to clarify something New Yorkers might be surprised to learn. There were no names here until 2004. This is a fairly recent installation. Remarkable that Laval and Pétain's names were added at that point, I guess, 60 years after their crimes were well known and established. Nonetheless, in New York City, any permanent art or cultural installations or removals are under the jurisdiction of this entity that I just named, the Public Design Commission. So they do have a rigorous process. We want that process to start. They have this power ultimately, and they should commence their review. We believe that a fair analysis here will only lead to one conclusion. But again, we're directing our demands at the PDC. They do have jurisdiction here.
Any other questions? When was the letter sent?
I think it's dated yesterday.
Yes. Have they responded at all?
I don't believe so.
Is there a possibility of putting something in the ground for viability to have an explainer instead, like to really fully teach what's going, what these men did?
Well, this was promised as part of the deliberation back in 2019. Clearly it has not happened. We don't believe that's adequate. Think that for these two men, nothing short of removal of the names will do justice, and that's what we're calling for.
I was hoping to hear from the professor because you compared this to the Confederate flag.
Yes.
As someone like me walking by that brings up memories. I want to know for someone like you, what does this bring up knowing that this is unfortunately part of your heritage?
Well, what it means is that individuals who were intrinsically, directly involved in the mass killing, in the genocide of European Jewry are being accorded a place of honor in New York City. And to go back a little bit on what and add to what Borough President Levine just said. There have been monuments in New York City that have been removed. There was a monument to a doctor, a gynecologist, I believe, in Upper Manhattan, who was deemed to be abhorrent and was therefore removed. There have been others who have been removed. And I am not going to get into right now into the appropriateness or not of removing monuments. But if we remove monuments to generals and cabinet members of the Confederacy, because we deem them correctly, in my opinion, to be antithetical to our values, if we remove other individuals because we deem their actions to be abhorrent to us, how on earth can anyone justify keeping a marker that places on equal footing men like Pétain and Laval with Winston Churchill and Charles de Gaulle. I mean, it is simply a distortion of history, a desecration of history, and quite frankly, it borders on the obscene.
Thank you. I want to acknowledge that we've been joined by my friend and a great leader, City Council member Eric Dinowitz, who's chair of the City Council Jewish Caucus. Eric, would you be willing to say a few words?
Sure.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I came all the way. I came all the way down from the Bronx, from the North Bronx, to be here today. There was a little train delay in the Manhattan part.
Sorry about
So not in the Bronx part. As the Borough President said, I'm Council Member Eric Dinowitz. I represent the North Bronx in the City Council, and I also chair the City Council's Jewish Caucus. I want to start by thanking Borough President Levine for being a leader not just on this issue, but on issues of health and safety. During the height of the pandemic, we were all figuring out what the news were, what the stats were, and I was going on his Twitter profile to find out what the COVID stats were every day, when I should wear a mask, what the update was on the COVID vaccines. And I'm thinking about that today because I've been thinking a lot about these names and why we're here today and sort of the time in which we're living. And he continues to be a leader on health and safety. And make no mistake about it, these names being honored in New York City are a matter of our health and safety. You know, there's something to be said about our emotional health, knowing that we live in a city that honors Nazi collaborators. And that's what these names on the ground here do. People who would have seen my family, our families, millions and millions of families destroyed. It's not an exaggeration to say we are in a time when it is becoming less and less safe to be Jewish. Anti-Semitic crimes, acts of bias, and attacks are on the rise. And by having these names here, we are giving a tacit endorsement to those attacks. We are saying as a city, we honor those who hate others for who they are and what they believe. And so I thank you again, Borough President Levine, for doing the work to keep us safe, especially on this day where we are commanded, we are supposed to remember the Holocaust. And in the Jewish faith, we remember by acting. We remember by doing things. So let's do something today and have these names removed from the Canyon of Heroes.
Thank you so much, Councilmember and Mr. Chair. Grateful for your leadership and for your words today. I think there might have been one other question. Not sure. If not, okay. Thank you all so much. Thank you, everybody.